Death of a Nation, Chapter 3, Zora.
The ground under Zora's feet quaked viciously. She looked up at Mama, whose eyes had popped open from her exhausted state of slumber. They both rushed to what they called the front door, which was only an old piece of cracked up wood on rusted hinges. They slammed their backs against the wall and hung on to each other. The train whistled, sending shocks through the shack as it passed by. Zora watched as the possessions that they had gathered over the past couple of months crashed to the ground. Those things that weren't durable enough, shattered into hundreds of pieces. Zora bit her lip. She told her mama that they should get metal dishes, but her mama insisted that the fragile glass material handcrafted by some old lady in the market would look much better in the house. Zora casted a glance over at her mama. Zora could tell tears threatened to spill from her eyes by the way the whites of them began to redden. Zora held her tongue. There was no need to rub it in now. The wooden floorboards settled. Zora popped up from the floor and ran over to clean up the mess. After a couple moments of cleaning, she realized she labored alone. Zora peered back to see her mama sitting still, staring into space. "Mama, we have to clean this up," Zora barked, hoping her loud voice would snap Mama out of it. Mama remained in her trance, blinking every couple of moments. Zora continued to clean up the mess. The one-room shack that had now become their permanent residence. It wasn't much, but it was better than sleeping on the dirt roads. It had taken them a few weeks to get to this district, and once they had arrived, they had to pay an enormous fee to get placed in a house. Mama didn't have the money, so she had to lend her and Zora's labor out for 2 years to a man named Mr. Devu. After Mama got off from work and she came back from school, they would go to Mr. Devu's shop and work for free. It was mostly cleaning and crafting some items for his real employees to sell in the market. But the fact that Zora knew they weren't getting anything for it made it drudgery. Zora complained for the first few days, but after her mama either ignored her or scolded her for it, she decided it was best to just endure for the time being. That was what Tata would have done. Zora grabbed another piece of glass. The edge pricked her finger. She yelped and stuck it in her mouth. "Mama, I need some help," she called out. Mama didn't respond. "Tata would have helped me," Zora muttered. Within moments, Mama was on her. Her beautiful face was creased. Her lips were tight and her eyebrows were drawn so far apart into her eyes that Zora thought they might fall off. "Don't say that ever again." "Mama, we haven't even talked about him since." Mama slapped Zora across the face. "I said shut up." Zora grabbed her face. The heat emanating from her cheek was nothing compared to the fire that roared in her belly. She stared at Mama. Something deep in her chest dared her to strike the woman back. Zora opened her mouth. A moan erupted from behind her. Zora pulled away, heading to the wagon. Zora looked down at Zola. It was the third noise this week. The first time it occurred, Zora thought her sister was waking, but after waiting up all night without any change, Zora quickly pushed those hopes to the side. She did what she could to keep her sister healthy for when she did wake up, but Zora was no medical expert. Zola's face had thinned, revealing her small cheekbones. Her small arms were just skin and bones. Zora feared that if Zola didn't wake up soon, she wouldn't see another day. Mama walked past, dumping glass into their trash can. Zora was convinced she was the only one who still cared whether or not Zola woke up. "I'm going out," Zora said as she walked towards the front door. "Where?" her mama asked icily. "With my friends," Zora answered, matching her mama's hiss. "Be back by sundown," Mama responded as she lied down in her cot. "Okay." Zora peeled out of the house. Zora stepped in front of Jubilani's shack. It wasn't much different from the one she stayed in. It was small with thin doors. Zora guessed that the people who worked to renovate these old buildings hadn't been given new materials or much time. Zora looked at the pieces of wood and nails that littered the area around the shack. The next couple of houses had the same construction materials listed near their residences. Transporting all these people has no decision made off of a whim. The people responsible had to have been planning this for some time now. "Hey, Zora," Jubilani's voice pulled her from her thoughts. She waved at the large boy who she called a friend. His clothes were just as old and ragged as hers. Knowing that he too had been through suffering made her feel oddly better. "Hey, Jubilani, is Info coming?" Jubulani shrugged. "He said he would be here, but you know him. He just pops up out of nowhere." Zora chuckled. "Yeah, I know." Zora gazed over the barren landscape, not keeping her eyes on anything in particular for too long. The question that had been clawing up her throat since Jubulani came outside was beginning to formulate on her lips. "What about Luan?" Jubulani scratched the back of his neck. I don't know about him. He hasn't really been around since, well, you know." Zora nodded. She knew exactly why she hadn't seen Luan. He was convinced that his family would thrive in this new world. He didn't grasp the full depth of the National Party's cruelty. Jubulani told her that when Luan and his family were escaping their home, Luan's arm was crushed in the wreckage. Nobody thought he was going to make it, but his parents paid some people they were traveling with them to cut it off. Zora could only imagine how depressed he must feel. Luan had his faults, but he was still their friend. "Yeah, I understand," she finally replied. "So what are we doing today?" Jubulani asked. The feeling of a stone sitting at the bottom of her belly was replaced by gleeful weightlessness. Zora's mouth opened in a wide, too smile. Jubulani shook his head. "Zora, you have to give this up." Zora stared up into Jubulani's brown eyes. For as long as I have breath in my body, I will never give this up. You know me better than that." "I do, but I hoped you would have gotten tired of this by now." He wiped beads of sweat from his forehead. "I know I am." "You don't have to come," Zora snapped. Jubulani rested his hand on Zora's shoulder. "I wouldn't do that to you, Zora. I care about you. I just don't want this hate to take over you." Zora rolled him off her shoulder. "I know what I'm doing." She began towards the market. "You coming or not?" Jubulani looked around before nodding and jogging towards her. Zora walked along the dirt pathway that was shallowly painted into the grass, big enough for 3 people to walk shoulder to shoulder. Why Jubulani insisted on walking behind her was a mystery she didn't have enough brain occupancy to figure out. She had a mission to accomplish in this overcrowded marketplace. Zora casually browsed the stalls set up alongside the pathway, stopping at one ever so often, but never purchasing anything. The sparkling jewels, intoxicating scents of perfumes and cooked meats, and the loud murmurs of haggling were almost overwhelming. Hundreds of people flowed in and out of the area, and Zora took notice of them all. Zora's eyes pinpointed anyone who wore anything close to muddy green color that stained the canvas of her imagination. Lush, green, emerald green, jade green, green like the glass of the plains, and olive green, but not the green she was looking for. She began to hate the color with a passion. Zora stopped at a flower shop, picking up one of the flowers and placing it close to her face. "Don't you think we've been here long enough?" Jubulani asked, as he mimicked her looking awkwardly out of place. "You can go," Zora said shortly before placing the flower back in its place and waving the suspicious shopkeeper off. "It's almost sundown and we should walk together." Jubulani glanced around. "It's not safe here. All of these desperate people, anything could happen." Zora strolled towards the next stall, intentionally ignoring Jubulani's comment. Jubulani took a deep breath before stepping in front of her. "He's not going to be here. It's been months, and you haven't seen him yet. I know what he did to your Tata was wrong, but you have to give this up." Zora's bottom lip quivered, and her eyes began to water. She swiped her forearm across her face, trying to physically push the tears that threatened to fall back into the wells of her eyes, but they fell anyway. She imagined the dark scar that ran through equally dark flesh from a chapped mouth to an ashen cheek. Cold, dark eyes filled with self-pride and malice, a revolver as black as a moonless night with the power to tear families apart in one moment. Chit-like. Chidike, Chidike. His name rang in her head. You don't know what it's like. Zora's voice trembled. Jubilani attempted to speak, but Zora cut him off. My Tata was taken from me. Right there. She looked down at the ground as if she could see him lying in his own blood, dying slowly all over again. They had no reason to do what they did. They have to pay. They have to, Zora shrieked. Some of the people nearby began looking at the exchange. Jubilani ushered Zora to a less crowded corner of the market. I will never fully understand, but I'm here for you. I've always been here for you. Zora shook her head. No, you can't just. It's just me alone. I'm the only one who can pull us through. Mama's too sad and Zola's. Her voice trailed off. Jubulani placed his hands on her shoulder. Shh. You don't have to say it. I know. He pulled her closer into his large chest. Zora wanted to resist, but the warmth that came from him was hard to push away. She hadn't felt this safe since her Tata died. You don't have to be so strong by yourself. Jubulani's voice rumbled against her face. Zora looked up at him. Thank you. Jubulani's face softened. Zora tried to pull away from the embrace, but Jubulani held on. He fixed his gaze into Zora's. A strange feeling crawled up her spine. Then, before she could react, he pressed his lips against hers. Zora slammed her foot into Jubulani's shin, sending him into the ground. What's wrong with you? Zora wiped his saliva from her lips. What is wrong with you? He yelled, rubbing his legs. We're just friends, Ju. That's it. Friends. Zora spat. I thought, he started. I'm sorry. He got up. Let's just walk home. No, I'll walk by myself. Zora, it's getting late, Jubulani argued. I don't care. Before he could protest, she sped away. Zora could finally see her house in the distance. The walk back seemed much longer than it had any other day. She glanced back down the road. No sign of Ju following her. Zora licked her dry lips. She could still taste his salty, sweat-flavored kiss. Zora wiped the back of her hand against her mouth. Ju was one of her first friends. They had done so much together over the years, throwing rocks at houses, fighting, and teasing Luan for being Luan. She wouldn't have ever thought he looked at her in that way. She didn't think anyone would look at her in that way. Zola was the pretty one. Zola wasn't girly at all. Sometimes people couldn't even tell that she was a girl when she was knee-deep in the mud and dirt. Zora would rather it that way. She couldn't get that moment out of her mind. Ju's eyes were filled with a passion like a wild gazelle. He kept her so close. She could still feel his heartbeat thumping louder and faster as time stretched on. Then his lips were on her before she even knew what was what. They were much softer than she would have guessed. Ju was a huge boy. One look at him and you would think he was going to crush your skull with his bare hands, but anyone who really knew him knew he was soft and fluffy on the inside. Zora walked up to her front door. In truth, he was the best friend she could ask for, aside from her sister. She knew she could trust him the most. Zora pulled the front door open. A chill traveled down her spine. The heavy smell of alcohol tainted the air. Zora stepped in the house. Broken pieces of plates, bowls, bottles, and shards of an unrecognizable source littered the entire floor. Mama? Zora called out. Her voice echoed throughout the empty shack. Zora wandered through the darkness, nearly slipping on a piece of glass. Mama, she called out again, but this time her voice shook. Shadows danced across the walls. Zora glanced over in its direction, but there was nothing there. Her steps shrunk from wide and confident to short and brief, as if she were walking across a tightrope. The two cots where she and her mama slept were empty. Zora passed them up and headed towards Zola. As she got closer, she could hear faint gasps. "Zola," Zora breathed. She picked up the pace. A crooked figure hidden in the darkness stood over Zola's wagon. Zora stopped. "Who are you?" Zora commanded with confidence she thought she had been drained of. The figure shuffled but did not turn around. "Get away from my sister," Zora yelled, balling her fists. "Shut up," the figure yelled. "I'm almost done." Zora frowned. "Mama, what are you doing?" The gasps became more frequent. "Shh," Mama whispered. Zora touched her mama's back. "Mama." Mama spun around. Zora stepped back, eyes wide. Mama's lips were trembling. Tiny pieces of glass pierced the right side of her face. Small drops of blood trickled down from the wounds. Her eyes were wild. Zora did not recognize this woman. "Can't you see, Zora?" Mama's voice came out like shrill, like the creaking floor. "I'm going to make everything better." Zora shook her head. "How? What are you talking about?" As the questions fell from her lips, she saw what her mama meant. Wrapped in her mama's hand was a blanket. "No." Zora reached for the blanket. Mama pushed her back. "Yes, we have lost everything, Zora. I intend to get it back. But we have to get rid of her. It's the only way. She is cursed. Can't you see?" Zora pulled her mama's arm. "No, Mama, stop." Mama's fist smashed into Zora's face. The weight of the blow pushed Zora to the floor. The room seemed much darker than before. Zora tried to get up, but her legs felt like noodles. Mama directed her attention back to the wagon. Zora could see her wrapping the blanket around Zola's face. "Stop, please." "Everything will be better. The lady from the market told me she is a seer. She told me our future, but first I have to get rid of this one." "You'll see, Zora. We'll be okay then." Zola's unconscious gasp for air started up again. Zora sobbed. "Zola, wake up. You have to wake up, Zola." The gasps pounded against Zora's skull like the beat of a drum as she sat helplessly on the floor until they fell silent. Mama bent down next to Zola. Her breath stunk so badly it made Zora's nose itch. She had never known her mama to drink. As the smell infiltrated Zora's nose more deeply, she realized that the scent was not alcohol. "What did you drink?" "It is done. We are free." Mama flared her arms out. That couldn't be true. She would not accept that her sister was dead. Zora hopped to her feet, but her mama pulled her back down. "No, sit with me. Let the dead be the dead." The smell crashed against Zora's senses. "What did you drink, Mama?" Zora asked. "The juice that reveals truth, baby. The seer gave it to me. I see things for what they are now." Her mama smiled stupidly. Zora whacked her mama in the face and ran towards her wagon. Zola's eyes were closed as usual. Zora dipped her head down to check her breathing. Mama yanked her back. Zora's head slammed against the side of the wagon and the dark room turned black. Sunlight peeled into the shack, pulling Zora back into consciousness. Zora opened her eyes. The morning revealed all that had happened last night. The broken pieces of glass layered over the floor so thick. There were only spots where she could see its wooden boards. Mama lied sleeping in her cot. Zora climbed from the floor. Her head felt like it had been run over by a truck. Dried up blood was caked up on her hand. Zora stared down into the wagon. Zola still lied, unmoving. Tears trickled down Zora's face. "I let you down. I was supposed to protect you and I didn't. I'm sorry, sissy." Zola's chest rose and fell, letting out a single long breath. Then brown pupils peeked out as Zola's eyelids fluttered open. "Zola," Zora muttered.